Welcome back to another episode of the BWIPP podcast. Law is back to impart some wisdom. Welcome back, Law.
Thank you.
It's almost like you never left.
It's almost like I was here the whole time.
So let's start with your background. What is it that you do and how did you break into the industry?
So currently I am a video editor in advertising, and I began as a runner in a post-production house, and at that point I wasn't necessarily sure that post-production was what I wanted to go into, so I took some time to apply for other jobs and expand my skills in motion graphics and more animated stuff, and then I fell back into editing. So I was a junior editor at the Daily Mail for just over a year, and then I was an editor at Immediate Media, who own BBC Good Food, Olive Magazine and Radio Times, and a portfolio of magazines. So I worked there for just over a year as well. And now I work at Blacklist Creative, where we work with a lot of Viacom's channels and also Amazon Prime to work on their adverts, promotional materials, and yeah, that kind of stuff. It's all exciting.
Great stuff. So you mentioned that you started out in a post house as a runner. Would you recommend that as an entry-level route based on your own personal experience?
Okay, so I think that with running, you're a barista, you are a cleaner, you are a tea boy, you are all of these things, but you do not really get to touch cuts. You don't get to actually do anything. And I found that my skills were just getting a bit stale working there. I wasn't doing anything creative. The good thing about it is that you do get to speak to editors, for those of them who, want to give you the time. They will let you sit and watch sometimes, but you still can't touch anything because you are not assigned to the project. You get an understanding of how it works from the back end, how post-production works, and it is interesting. And you can make good connections. But for me personally, it didn't work, and it put me off post for quite a bit.
Got you. So would you say then that as a runner, perhaps your daily duties don't involve being kind of hands-on, with the software, with being creative, with trying to get that experience, but it's a good place to kind of network?
I mean, I think that when you are a runner, you are expected to do certain kinds of training. They normally want to move you into MCR, so machine control room, and that is where you would be an edit assistant. So they do train you to do that. And I guess if you make friends with the right kinds of editors or like audio guys, or if you mingle with the right people, they will also train you a bit further to go into what they go into.
And if you kind of wanted to shadow an editor and really get that kind of in-depth knowledge of cutting and being creative, where would you find that balance of, I've got to run and grab a tea for another editor, but also I want to shadow this editor? How did that work? Did you have to kind of do that out of scheduled hours, or could you do it whilst you're on a shift? Like, how does that?
Out of scheduled hours is often when they've gone home themselves anyway. If you needed to go and get a tea, or if someone needed to go and do something, unfortunately that always had to come first. So I would usually go in when it was just quiet. Other times I would have brought them a coffee, and then we'd start chatting and stuff like that, and then you just end up being in there for like half hour, 45 minutes, and then you go back out and your team's like, where were you? And you're like,
that's really interesting. So my background is a little bit different. So I didn't come up through a post house and running. I came through a trainee scheme. And so the advice that I had in terms of progression was set a time limit. So you only want to be a trainee for a certain amount of time before you're stepping up. or it could either be 2 or 3 credits under your belt, or maybe 6 months to a year or a year and a half, where you've kind of established the working knowledge of that role, and it's like, I'm ready now to step up to a second assistant. How does that work if you come up through a post house? How do you progress from runner?
Bearing in mind, I was only there for a few months, and then I left and I went into the digital sphere, which operates very differently. But in the post houses, I guess it runs similarly to how it would with you. You go into edit assistant, but then once you're in MCR, you then have to train with one of the editors.
So did you say that you were running for a few months and then you moved over to junior editing? So you stepped up.
In a way, yeah. I mean, there was a time between the running and then getting my position as a junior where I was unemployed. But that's the song of many people starting out, really.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I felt that it was a large step up because I was working on edits every day.
I think that that's like a really impressive step up. Did you have editing experience previously, or did you learn on the job?
I had editing experience from uni. Like when you go in for a junior position, that is the starting point. But still, even then, you can't really not have any editing experience. So you have to know your software. You have to at least know how to set pace, how to do your most basic mixing. But yeah, I think there was a lot that I learned on the job, and then there was a lot that I learned from my peers as well, and that was so good. That's what I love about working on larger teams or in companies where everyone's accessible, because where you might go, oh, I'm stuck on this, someone else is there to help you. So I learned a lot on the job. From each job, you learn things that you can, grow from, because they're all different. You're still going to learn something new each time, and that will elevate you and your skill set.
Absolutely.
And I think for people like me, it's not that I don't ever want to work in high-end TV or feature or anything like that. I would absolutely love to. But it's then going, well, do I then have to start all the way at the bottom again, even though I do have the skills and I could just step across instead because I'm capable of doing that? It's that I think there's a bit of a divide between those workflows, between those kinds of editing. But yeah, it's...
So this is really interesting then, because you are working in a different side of post-production to me. You are actively editing, cutting material, you're kind of building your portfolio, you're getting that editing experience. And I'm also getting that editing experience, but maybe not to the same extent. So I might be assembling scenes for editors and things. I am assembling scenes for editors. But I think my underlying question, I guess, around this is it about making a choice? So let's say, entry level. Is it about making a choice between getting that editing experience and going into digital, knowing that you can start off as a junior editor and you're instantly cutting and you're, getting that experience? Or is it about the opposite, and it's high-end TV, starting off as a trainee, doing that for a couple of years, then progressing to second, doing that for maybe a year, then progressing up to first, and doing that for X number of years before you step up to editor? Where's the kind of the crux between it? Is time, I guess.
It's time. It's time, it's talking, it's asking yourself what you're okay with.
Yeah, definitely. Really, really interesting as well. So I guess final thoughts then, for someone who is interested in pursuing a career in digital, what would be a top tip or two from your perspective?
As you have the opportunity to be a part of a team and to be creative, take your time to build on your skill set, to ask your seniors questions, to ask for their feedback, to work on feedback, and to branch out to different projects. Because the good thing about being in an agency is there's always so many different projects going on, and you can actually work on several projects at once. So the projects will be different kinds of editing, different moods, different all of this kind of stuff. And you will have such a varied experience. And that in turn is then going to help you think, do I want to actually specialize in anything specific? Because you can do that if you'd like to. So yeah, to sum that up, is to really make use of the people and the teams around you to build yourself as a creative.
That's a really good piece of advice.
And I just want to say that digital is great. It's good fun. I do prefer the workload that I have to the workload that I would have in your field. But at the same time, I would also, if we could go between, I absolutely would. I would love to do what you do and then come back.
Yeah, see, I would love to experience kind of a day in the life of a junior editor, just to see how it differs or how similar it is to what I do day to day. Crossover.
You'd have to do a week, actually. You'd need to.
Oh, you think?
You
have to delve into, okay, a week. Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura. I think that's going to be really, really helpful for people that, I feel like there's this idea of post-production is high-end TV and film, but it's like digital is a whole, other ball game. That's the end of this episode of the BWIPP podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on Spotify or watching the video podcast, wherever I decide to upload this. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. The BWIPP podcast.